It was a crisp Tuesday on March 15, 1986, when Evan Maxford entered a bustling Toys R Us in Fairfax, Virginia. He didn't know his simple shopping trip would eventually expose a sophisticated Soviet spy ring hidden within the American suburbs. The man was looking for an Atari 2600 Junior, the latest sleek redesign of the country's most iconic gaming system. The compact black console, decorated with its signature rainbow stripe, was priced at a very accessible $49.99. Evan, a 42-year-old technician for a local defense contractor, was finally giving in to his son Max's pleas. The boy had spent months begging for a video game system, oblivious to the high-stakes geopolitical drama that was about to unfold. Neither the father nor the son could have guessed that a single plastic game cartridge would trigger a massive federal investigation. This purchase was the first step in uncovering a creative smuggling network that had been operating in plain sight. By the mid-80s, the original Atari was fighting for its life against newer, more powerful Japanese hardware. The 2600 was widely considered a dinosaur of the early digital age, yet it remained a nostalgic favorite for many families. The Junior model was Atari's strategic attempt to stay relevant by offering a budget-friendly alternative to the expensive Nintendo. It was smaller, cheaper to produce, and fully compatible with the massive library of games released since 1977. For households that couldn't afford the premium price of a Nintendo system, the Junior was the perfect entry point. It allowed kids to play legends like Pac-Man or Missile Command without completely draining the family's monthly savings. Maxford drove back to his suburban home in Kings Park West to surprise his son with the new gift. He spent the afternoon in the family room, meticulously connecting the black box to their heavy, wood-paneled television set. To keep the price competitive, Atari didn't include any games in the box, so Evan had to buy software separately. He had found a discounted copy of Junior Pac-Man for $7, enough to give his son a taste of the digital frontier. Max was absolutely captivated when the title screen finally flickered into existence on the screen. The blocky, yellow protagonist was composed of primitive pixels, but it still managed to radiate a certain 8-bit charm and personality. The graphics were incredibly basic by any modern standard, consisting of geometric shapes moving over black voids. However, there was a raw, immersive quality to the experience that even the most advanced modern computers struggled to replicate. Max navigated the yellow hero through glowing labyrinths, listening to the iconic Waka Waka sound effects. He spent hours dodging colorful ghosts that were little more than tiny squares with eyes, fully absorbed in the digital hunt. The software lacked modern features like save points or a pause button, creating a unique sense of arcade tension. If the character died, the game was over, forcing the player to start the entire journey from the very first level. Watching his son play, Evan reflected on his own youth in the 1950s, when even a black-and-white TV was a miracle. Back then, the idea of an interactive world inside a screen felt like something from a far-fetched science fiction novel. Now, his child was mastering a virtual reality with nothing but a plastic joystick and a single red button. The boy was completely lost in a landscape made of silicon chips and glowing phosphorus dots, oblivious to the world outside. 3 weeks of quiet domestic life passed as Max slowly mastered every maze and pattern in the Pac-Man game. He eventually became bored with the repetitive levels and started asking his father for new cartridges to expand his library. Since new games were quite expensive, ranging from $15 to $30, Evan wasn't eager to buy them at retail. He preferred to wait for a better deal, knowing that the technology was already becoming somewhat obsolete. A perfect opportunity arrived when Evan's wife, Janice, spotted a sign for a garage sale on nearby Gainsborough Drive. In their quiet neighborhood, these sales were common events for families looking to clear out their basements and attics. Janice was on the hunt for kitchenware or glass dishes, while Evan was hoping to find some used tools for his garage. They decided to stop by, unaware that this casual weekend outing would lead them to a dangerous military secret. Hidden among stacks of old clothes and books, they discovered a cardboard box containing 8 Atari cartridges. The seller was a widow in her 70s named Eleanor Vasquez, who seemed eager to get rid of her grandson's old hobby. The boy had left the games behind when he moved out the previous summer, and the grandmother had no use for them. She offered to sell the individual games for $2 each, or the entire collection for a flat $10 bill. Evan looked through the titles, recognizing famous games like River Raid, Pitfall, and Missile Command. One cartridge, however, had no official artwork, only a plain white label with the handwritten words, Space Battle 2. Max Ford handed Mrs. Vasquez the money, ignoring the skeptical look his wife gave him for buying more plastic junk. Max was already digging through the box, eager to get home and see if the mysterious white label game was any good. The boy spent the rest of the afternoon testing each game, moving with the pure energy and excitement of a 12-year-old. Most of the titles worked perfectly, but Space Battle 2 refused to load, showing only a void on the screen. Max tried everything. He toggled the difficulty switches, hit the reset button, and even blew into the connector. Despite his best efforts, the mysterious game remained silent and dead, frustrating the young player to no end. He eventually brought the broken cartridge to his father's workshop, hoping the technician could fix the issue. When Evan took the plastic unit, he immediately noticed that it felt strangely heavy and had an unusual physical texture. Evan told his son he would examine the electronics when he had a moment of free time during the week. He put the cartridge on his workbench, where it sat under a halogen lamp, waiting to reveal its complex and hidden interior. Evan waited until the evening of Tuesday, April 8, to finally examine the malfunctioning unit. Despite a long shift at the defense firm, he was nagged by a technician's instinct that something was wrong. Under the focused beam of his halogen lamp, he noticed 4 screws holding the casing together, a detail entirely foreign to standard Atari production models of that era. He removed the fasteners and separated the plastic shells, only to find a circuit board that defied logic. Standard game media usually housed a single memory chip with very little else on the green board. But this device featured 3 separate integrated circuits and a maze of copper traces that looked far too sophisticated for just running a simple arcade port for children. Evan's 20-year career, starting as an Air Force radar specialist and continuing into private defense work, allowed him to recognize high-end engineering. This wasn't consumer electronics, it resembled top-tier military hardware used for data shielding. He studied the custom chip markings, realizing that no budget pirate operation would ever invest in such an expensive design. Sitting in the silence of his workshop, Evan weighed his options. He held an active security clearance and knew the strict protocols for reporting potential espionage. However, the fear of a false alarm making him look paranoid was heavy. The intelligence world was small, and a single mistake could lead to years of unnecessary federal scrutiny and a ruined professional reputation. It was 1986, and the global atmosphere was thick with mutual distrust. Despite diplomatic talks, the specter of the Cold War remained a daily reality for those in the defense sector. The headlines were full of Americans caught selling secrets to Moscow, and the entire security apparatus was on high alert, hunting for leaks in a high-stakes game of shadows and technical theft. On Wednesday morning, April 9, Max Ford took the cartridge to work to consult his mentor, Carl Hutcherson. Carl was a brilliant mind with an MIT doctorate who had previously handled classified NSA initiatives. If the mysterious board contained foreign technology or hidden functions, a veteran with Carl's deep institutional knowledge would be the one person capable of seeing it. When Evan entered the lab, he found the senior engineer focused on complex diagrams. Keeping his tone professional and measured, Evan recounted the story of the garage sale and the non-functioning game. He placed the open cartridge on the workbench, allowing the elder expert to peer into the heart of the device with his thick glasses, tracing the pathways with a steady hand. After a long, tense silence, Carl delivered a verdict that chilled the room: the chips were undeniably manufactured in the Soviet Union. The specific manufacturing style and materials used in the substrate pointed toward a specialized factory in the Eastern Bloc. This was a clear sign of foreign military-industrial origin, something that shouldn't exist inside a suburban toy box. Carl pointed out that the presence of an erasable EEPROM chip instead of a standard mass-produced mask ROM was a massive red flag. Retail products were hard-coded during production to save money, while this unit was designed to be reprogrammed. The other logic circuit suggested data management functions that were completely unnecessary for a game, indicating a deeper, hidden purpose. The senior engineer was adamant that this could not be a simple bootleg copy. Pirate manufacturers in the 80s relied on cheap components from Taiwan or Hong Kong, not custom-engineered Soviet hardware. The sheer cost and complexity involved in building such a board meant it was a state-sponsored tool, likely intended for moving sensitive data across international borders. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Carl insisted they document every detail of the transaction on Gainsborough Drive. They needed to provide the FBI with names, addresses, and dates immediately. The realization that they were holding a potential weapon of espionage meant that their legal and professional duty surpassed any concerns about career optics or personal privacy. That night, Evan made the call to the Washington field office. He went through several transfers before reaching a duty officer, where he detailed his background and his findings. The agent's tone remained professional as he took notes, eventually promising that a specialist would follow up on the report. The first gears of the massive federal machine were finally beginning to turn. By the next afternoon, Special Agent Mark Rivera requested that Max Ford visit the office in person. Evan arrived on Friday, April 11th, with the disassembled hardware in a protective box. He met with Rivera and another official named Dennis Cole, meticulously walking them through the timeline and showing them the sketches he had made of the board's complex internal layout. The FBI agents photographed every component and took a formal statement, though they seemed somewhat skeptical. They mentioned receiving many false leads about strange electronics fairly regularly, but acknowledged that Maxford's expertise made this case worth checking. Evan left the office with a feeling that the Bureau might just let the cartridge collect dust in storage. Indeed, months of silence followed. The cartridge was logged into the evidence system and forgotten as the Bureau focused on higher priority leaks. In 1985 and 1986, the U.S. was dealing with the devastating Walker spy ring and other major breaches. In such a chaotic environment, a single broken toy found at a neighborhood sale seemed like a minor anomaly rather than a threat. A shift occurred in March 1987 when FBI Director William Webster issued a new mandate. He ordered the Technical Services Division to re-examine all seized digital equipment for potential intelligence value. This was part of a major modernization effort to ensure the Bureau kept pace with the rapid advancement of Soviet tech. The neglected Atari cartridge was finally pulled. The task fell to Peter Voss, a 28-year-old expert in computer science. Upon receiving the file, Voss noticed the earlier reports of Soviet origin and became immediately intrigued. He confirmed that the primary chip was an EEPROM, not a consumer-grade ROM, which proved the device was a custom-built prototype. He took high-resolution images to cross-reference the markings. When the CIA analysts reviewed the photos, they provided a chilling confirmation. The markings matched components from a high-security facility near Moscow that produced hardware exclusively for the Red Army's intelligence services. Voss then moved to the next phase, carefully desoldering the memory chip to connect it to an external reader and pull the raw binary data. As the hexadecimal code filled his monitor, Voss realized he wasn't looking at a game. The data had a rigid mathematical structure and recurring patterns that bore no resemblance to the assembly code used by Atari developers. It was clear that the information had been heavily encrypted and deliberately obscured to prevent anyone but a trained officer from reading its contents. For 2 weeks, the young technician tried every decryption algorithm in the Bureau's library. He conducted statistical tests and searched for artifacts left by data compression software. The 8 kilobytes of memory were packed to capacity, suggesting that whoever programmed the chip had gone to great lengths to maximize the amount of stolen intelligence hidden within. Realizing the task required more specialized power, Voss reached out to the cryptanalysis experts at the NSA. Based at Fort Meade, the agency possessed the most advanced code-breaking supercomputers in the world. He handed over the digital image of the ROM along with detailed photos of the PCB, hoping their specialists could crack the sophisticated Soviet shield protecting the data. An elite NSA team spent 7 grueling months dissecting the digital puzzle. They had to reverse engineer the logic of the Soviet chips by mapping the physical board layout since no documentation existed. They eventually discovered that one of the chips functioned as a proprietary hardware key, designed to unscramble the ROM data only when certain electrical conditions were met. To solve this, the analysts wrote a custom software emulation that mimicked the behavior of the Russian hardware. Finally, on November 18, 1987, more than a year and a half after Evan Maxford first reported the find, the code was broken. The resulting file sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the Pentagon and the CIA, triggering immediate national security alerts. The decoded text contained the sensitive blueprints for American air superiority. Specifically, it held the exact operational parameters for the radar warning receivers and electronic jamming systems installed in F-15 and F-16 fighters. This was the electronic brain of the U.S. Air Force, detailing every frequency and algorithm used to protect American pilots from enemy fire. The data was classified at the highest levels of secret and top secret. It included signal processing logic and response times that would allow an enemy to render American defenses completely useless. The entire operation was a masterpiece of camouflage. A malfunction in a cheap toy had served as the perfect cover for a theft that could have changed the outcome of a war. The NSA immediately flagged the case for the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, and the investigation was given the highest priority rating. The implications were terrifying. A high-level mole had successfully removed classified specs from a secure facility. They had used the popularity of video games to smuggle the information past guards who never thought to look inside. In December 1987, the Bureau initiated a sprawling manhunt to trace the origin of the lethal toy. Teams of field agents were deployed throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, attempting to map every single transaction that led the device from a secure government lab to a dusty cardboard box in a widow's driveway. The forensic trail was already nearly 2 years old. The investigation's first priority was a return to the Maxford residence on December 8, 1987. Agents Rivera and Cole arrived unannounced, surprising Evan, who had presumed the matter was ancient history. Rivera spoke in low, grave tones, explaining that the non-functional game was actually a container for stolen secrets and that they needed every detail of the purchase. Maxford provided the specific location on Gainsborough Drive, prompting the agents to drive there immediately. However, the lead was already cold. The White House had been sold to a new family who had no knowledge of the previous owner. They explained that they had acquired the property through an estate liquidation, meaning the primary witness was no longer there to talk. It was soon revealed that Eleanor Vasquez had passed away in June 1987, right as the NSA was beginning its technical analysis. The FBI tracked down her daughter in Florida, who confirmed that her mother had sold off most of her grandson's old belongings to clear out the house. This led the federal agents to a young man named Thomas, then 23 and living in Baltimore. When the agents finally confronted Thomas in mid-December, he was cooperative but visibly shaken. He was a simple mechanic who had spent his adolescence obsessed with the Atari platform. From the late 70s until his high school graduation in 1982, he had traded hundreds of cartridges at school and at local hobby shops, making it impossible to remember every deal. Thomas explained that he had moved away in 1985, leaving a box of obsolete junk at his grandmother's house. He had never even tried to play the white-labeled cartridge, as his interest in gaming had faded by the time he entered the workforce. The agents pressed him to remember anyone who might have handed him a game titled Space Battle 2 during his teen years. The name Trey Orwell finally emerged from Thomas's memories. Trey was a high school classmate with a reputation for being a computer whiz who often talked about creating his own software. However, Thomas couldn't confirm if Trey had provided the specific cartridge. The two had lost contact years earlier, as is common after the fragmented days of graduation. The FBI secured a court order to seize student records and eventually located Trey Orwell in Northern Virginia, where he was working in the burgeoning software industry. When questioned in January 1988, Orwell remembered Thomas but denied ever possessing a game with that title. He claimed he had sold his entire collection at his own garage sale back in 1983. The trail had effectively evaporated. With every owner claiming they had traded the hardware years ago, there were no receipts, no paper trails, and no physical evidence to link a specific individual to the theft. The cartridge had moved through a black hole of anonymous suburban commerce, passing through a dozen hands before landing on Evan Maxford's workbench. Desperate for a breakthrough, the FBI expanded their search to the personnel files of Raytheon and Hughes Aircraft. They looked for employees with suspicious travel patterns or sudden unexplained wealth. They spent thousands of hours cross-referencing security clearances with known Soviet recruitment tactics, but the investigation produced only volumes of paperwork. By the spring of 1988, the Bureau was forced to confront a grim reality. They had the weapon, but the hand that had used it was long gone. The investigation had consumed massive resources with zero arrests, leaving the counterintelligence community to wonder just how many other games were currently sitting in the hands of the KGB or other foreign agencies. By March 1988, the federal government officially recognized that the investigation had reached a total impasse. The trail was dead, and the classified blueprints for American electronic warfare had almost certainly been scrutinized by Soviet engineers. The intelligence breach was a permanent scar on the defense industry, a failure that would take years to rectify. Security experts operated under the dark assumption that this wasn't an isolated incident. If one cartridge had been found by accident, it was highly probable that others had reached their intended destinations in Moscow. The KGB had likely developed a routine for this type of data exfiltration, using the massive consumer market of the West to hide their tracks. Classified warnings were quietly distributed to every major defense contractor in the United States. The memos warned about the danger of using consumer-grade electronics as transport for digital intelligence, though the instructions were intentionally vague. The government didn't want the public to know how easily their military secrets had been turned into a toy. The Space Battle II scheme remains one of the most brilliant examples of Cold War espionage. It utilized the very thing that defined American life in the 80s, mass consumerism, and turned it against the nation's security. It was a smuggling network that required no secret meetings or dead drops, just a simple exchange between unsuspecting hobbyists. The only reason the operation was ever exposed was a series of improbable coincidences. If the cartridge hadn't malfunctioned, or if it had been bought by someone without Evan Maxford's technical curiosity, the secret would still be buried in plastic. A single technician's refusal to leave a broken thing unexamined was the only thing that broke the Soviet shield. By the end of 1988, the official files were sealed and marked as unresolved. Evan Maxford received a formal letter of appreciation from the Bureau in September of that year, a quiet thank you for a service he could never discuss with his neighbors. He went back to his life, a silent guardian who had accidentally stumbled upon the front lines of a secret war. The Atari 2600 Jr. was finally pulled from store shelves in 1992, marking the end of an era. The gaming world had moved into the age of 16-bit power and three-dimensional graphics, leaving the blocky pixels of the 80s behind. The hardware that once held the secrets to the F-16 was now just a piece of nostalgia for a generation of aging gamers. As the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, the urgent threat posed by the cartridge began to fade into the pages of history books. The high-stakes drama of the Cold War was replaced by new global challenges, and the story of the Space Battle II cartridge became a ghost story whispered in the halls of Quantico and Fort Meade. Today, the story serves as a reminder of a time when the world was divided by an iron curtain and when even a child's toy could be a weapon. It is a footnote in the long, dark history of espionage, a tale of how a simple garage sale purchase almost changed the balance of power in the skies above the 20th century, and how it was saved by a father's intuition.